We have inundated, especially young men.
Yeah.
Go seek freedom. Go do what you want, how you want to do it, when you want to do it, which is fine. There's nothing inherently wrong to that when you're young. But if you really want meaning, if you want satisfaction, if you want direction, it's the stuff that has consequence. It's family, it's work. That's exactly right.
Freedom is.
But we're not teaching young men that.
No.
Intentionally. That's the other thing I wanted to get to, but go ahead.
Right.
I think it's intentional.
Well, I think it is too, because it's part and parcel of the idea that the productive activity of young men, and this also goes for the masculine, symbolically masculine activity of young women, by the way, but the productive activity of young men is indistinguishable from the force that gives rise to the crushing tyranny of the patriarchy. It's like, well, and that also gives young men a moral excuse not to engage in life. It's like, well, you know, productive activity is for fools.
I see it all the time. I've been told I'm a horrible person my whole life. What use is this to me? I'm going to go play video games in my basement.
Yeah, well, and it gives an excuse to the useless part of men that don't want to succeed, because it's easy to sit around. I mean, it isn't, because the long-term consequences of that are just absolutely devastating.
Yes.
But see, so when we have a discussion about freedom, you know, we might also say, well, the freedom is, I think this is right, it's freedom to pick your poison. It's freedom to pick your responsibility.
That's correct.
And you might say, well, there's a set of weights in front of you that you have to pick up in order to stand yourself. Because that's the other thing I think about human beings. Well, you know, conscientiousness is a trait, and we don't have an animal model for conscientiousness. In fact, we don't understand conscientiousness at all from a psychological perspective.
Or Darwinian perspective.
Well, that's more complicated, because conscientious men tend to do better, and so they're going to be more successful. But we don't have a model for what conscientiousness is. But conscientiousness is, at least in part, the necessity to carry a load for yourself and for other people, or to suffer guilt and shame as a consequence. And so that seems built in, especially to conscientious people. Now, conscientious people tend to be more conservative, because that's one of the predictors of conservatism. But it could easily be that freedom is the freedom to choose your yoke, let's say. And then you choose the weight that you have to carry, so that you can justify your miserable existence to yourself, so that you can go to bed at the end of the night and you can think, look, I did what I needed to do to set things right today, and I don't have to carry the existential weight around of my failure and uselessness as a consequence. The existential psychologists in the 1950s who emerged out of the chaos of World War II were very much concentrated on the idea of existential guilt, you know, that you owed being a ransom for your existence, and the way that you paid that ransom was to work for the betterment of being. I mean, it's a very ancient idea, but
of course.
But it is the one idea, I think, that gives people the self-respect, not self-esteem, the self-respect that's necessary to carry them through terrible times.
When I'm asked, well, what has Jordan Peterson done for your members, the people you know, I say, he has them to stop acting like Peter Pan. So that they can actually be a man and not a boy.
Well, the Peter Pan story is a really interesting one, because Peter Pan means everything, right? Technically, that's what Pan means. And Peter Pan wants to be a child because a child can be anything, can be everything, right? So what you have in childhood is that a plethora of potential. And the problem with growing up is that you have to sacrifice that Pan potential for a defined actuality, right? That's to grow up and become something instead of staying potentially anything. Now, the problem with Peter Pan is that he looks into the world and sees Captain Hook as his role model, right? And so that's his model for adulthood. And Hook is terrified of death. That's the crocodile that's chasing him with the clock in his stomach. And the crocodile already has a piece of him. It's got a taste of him. And so Hook is constantly chased by the dragon of chaos, essentially, that's already got a taste of him. And because Hook is terrified of his own mortality, and terrified in general, he's a tyrant. And so Pan looks at Hook and says, well, if that's adulthood, I'd rather stay king of the lost boys.
That's exactly
right. And so, yeah, and it's a very powerful story, well, which is why people still tell it.
What's one piece of advice that you would have given your 16-year-old self?
Don't be so high and mighty that you don't take advantage of the humble opportunities that are granted to you. When I look back, I didn't like school at all. You might say I hated it. And I've thought a lot about that, because I thought, well, there were reasons. I was a very fast reader. I could get through the books that were given to us in English class, generally in the first day. And that wasn't really appreciated, I would say. But there were things, and I was bored a lot as a teenager and got into a reasonable amount of trouble, not an unreasonable amount, but then, there were sports teams and there were attempts to organize plays, and there were things that I didn't do that I could have that would have made my life better. But I was too cynical, maybe, to take full advantage of them. And I did work when I was a kid. I worked in restaurants as a dishwasher, short order cook, that sort of thing. That was a really good decision. I think my fondest memories in some ways of my adolescence are memories of working in the restaurant. But life is very difficult. And in order to thrive with this difficult life, if an opportunity is presented to you, you shouldn't be so arrogant that you dismiss it. And it's really easy to be arrogant as a teenager, especially if you're smart, because you think, well, I'm smarter than everybody else. It's like, actually, no. There's lots of people that are a lot smarter than you. You just haven't met them yet. And you're not as smart as you think you are, besides. And other people aren't as dumb as you think they are either.
There's different kinds of smart.
There certainly is. Yes, and wise beats smart. So I would say if you're 16 and your life isn't so happy, it's like, look around and see if there are opportunities that people are granting you, even imperfect opportunities, because they're going to be imperfect, that you could exploit, let's say, in the proper way and learn and grow. I had this teacher, Ada Paul. She's dead now. I really liked her in grade 4. She was an organist at the church. And when I was 14, 15, she offered to teach me how to play the organ. I, for a variety of reasons, wasn't really that into the idea. And so I kind of went, and then a couple of times I skipped it, and it just sort of fell apart, and which was pretty rude of me, obviously, because she went out of her way to offer this. And that's a good example, because it wasn't cool to play the organ. It wasn't cool to do I don't know what it was like when you grew up. When I grew up, it wasn't cool to do anything. She was a great teacher. I really liked Ada Paul. She was, and I betrayed her trust, It's like, that wasn't very bright.
I think we all have memories like that as kids,
Yeah.
But I think that advice is good to even young adults, even to adults, really, to pause and appreciate the opportunities and the doors that are always open to them.
Well,
the experiences that are always available.
Well, here's an idea.
Yeah.
So life is brutal. And what you have to set against that is possibility. And you might say, well, life is so brutal that you have to utilize all the possibility that comes your way. So an opportunity manifests itself and you turn it down. You ignore it, you let it drift away. It's like, that's one thing that you had against the horror of existence that you let go of. You let go of 10 of those things, man, you're on the street.
Right.
And it's no fun there. And it doesn't get better. And so there is a possibility that if you utilized all the possibility that was offered to you, that your life would be straight and clean and engaging and acceptable and positive. And that's worth finding out if that's the case, because it might be true. Find out that edge that you can push yourself against. And it's going to be different for different people. But that's the call to adventure and heroism. And there are life and death situations everywhere around you if you want to involve yourself in them. Now, sometimes that might be like to put yourself together to the degree that you can, say physically or spiritually or intellectually. It could be an intellectual battle. It could be a moral battle. Like the frontier is everywhere. The frontier is just the edge between what you know and what you don't know. You want to put yourself on that damn edge and make yourself into something. And you can retreat into comfort in the modern world. And I think that is a problem. I've noticed that it's one of the pathologies of wealth I would say, because one of the problems with being relatively wealthy if you're a parent is that you cannot provide your children with necessity. And that's a big problem because they need necessity to call them into being. And, you know, if you don't have a lot of material resources and your children ask you for something, you can say no because no is the answer. It's like, no, we can't do that. But if you can say yes, then it's really hard to say no because then you're just arbitrary. Well, I don't know. It's like Kierkegaard said, you know, there will come a time when we have so much security and comfort that what we'll want more than anything else is deprivation and challenge. And I think that's particularly what young men want.